step into this story knowing it is not just history. It is a mirror. What unfolded in Iran in 1953, struggles over dignity, power, and the right to shape one's own destiny, still echoes in the streets and voices of Iran today. The names have changed, the faces have changed, but the tension between a people's will and the forces that seek to control it remains painfully familiar. To understand the present, we must walk back into this moment when a nation stood up for its sovereignty, only to discover how quickly its future could be rewritten from the shadows. A nation between empire and oil, Iran 1951. In the early 1950s, Iran stood at a crossroads. On paper, it was an independent kingdom under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Its most valuable resource, oil, was controlled by a foreign power, the British-owned Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, AIOC, the ancestor of today's BP. For decades, British engineers, managers, and officials had dominated the oil fields and refineries, while most Iranians lived in poverty, watching tankers carry away their country's wealth. Resentment simmered. National pride and economic injustice fused into a single question. How can a nation be sovereign if its lifeblood is owned by someone else? Into this question stepped a tall, austere, deeply principled man, Mohammad Mossadegh. Mossadegh, the reluctant symbol of national dignity. Mossadegh was not a revolutionary in the classic sense. He was an aristocrat, educated in Europe, a constitutionalist who believed in the rule of law and parliamentary power. He wept openly in parliament when speaking of Iran's suffering, and that vulnerability made him strangely powerful. He embodied both the pain and the dignity of his people. In 1951, amid rising nationalist sentiment, the Iranian parliament chose Mossadegh as prime minister. He quickly became the political ace of a simple but explosive demand. Iran must control its own oil. The oil nationalization, a line in the sand. Under Mossadegh's leadership, the Iranian parliament voted to nationalize the oil industry, to take back control from the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. For Britain, this was not just an economic loss, it was a challenge to imperial prestige. AIOC had been a pillar of British power. The British government responded with a mix of legal pressure, economic warfare, and covert action. Oil boycott. Britain organized a global embargo on Iranian oil, strangling Iran's economy. Legal battles. They took Iran to the International Court of Justice and the UN, trying to paint Mossadegh as reckless and unlawful. Covert destabilization. British intelligence began working inside Iran to weaken Mossadegh's government. But Mossadegh did not back down. He became a hero across the global south, a symbol that a small nation could stand up to empire. The Cold War lens, from nationalist to threat. By the early 1950s, the world was divided into Cold War camps. The United States, under President Dwight D. Eisenhower, viewed almost every crisis through the fear of Soviet expansion. Britain understood this and reframed the Iranian crisis. Mossadegh was no longer just a nationalist, he was portrayed as a potential gateway for communism in Iran, especially with the presence of the leftist Tudeh party. Mossadegh himself was not a communist, he was a constitutional nationalist, but in the logic of the Cold War, nuance often disappeared. Britain pushed Washington. Help us remove Mossadegh, or risk losing Iran to the Soviets. In 1953, the U.S. agreed. Operation Ajax, designing a coup in the shadows. The plan to overthrow Mossadegh was given a code name. CIA name, TP Ajax or Operation Ajax. MI6 name, Operation Boot. Key figures included Kermit Roosevelt Jr., CIA officer and grandson of former U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt, who ran the operation on the ground in Tehran. Donald Wilbur, a CIA planner and scholar of Persia, who helped design the operation and later wrote its internal history. Their mission: remove Mossadegh, strengthen the Shah, protect Western oil interests. The tools of the coup were not tanks alone, but narratives, money, and manipulation. Propaganda, newspapers and clerics were paid to denounce Mossadegh as godless, chaotic, or communist-aligned. Note, is this the same modus operandi today? Street mobs, thugs and paid crowds were organized to create chaos, sometimes posing as Mossadegh supporters, sometimes as his enemies, to make the country look ungovernable. What a coincidence, we saw the same situation in Iran just a few weeks ago. Political bribery, members of parliament, military officers, and influential figures were bribed or pressured to turn against the prime minister. Royal decree, Firman. The Shah was persuaded to sign a decree dismissing Mossadegh and appointing General Fazlollah Zahedi as prime minister. On paper, it would look legal. In reality, it was a foreign-engineered regime change. The first attempt, failure and fear. The coup did not succeed immediately. In mid-August 1953, Colonel Nematullah Nasiri, acting on the Shah's orders, tried to arrest Mossadegh and present the royal decree dismissing him. Mossadegh, however, had loyal elements in the military. The plot was exposed, and the attempt collapsed. The Shah panicked. Fearing for his life and throne, he fled Iran, first to Iraq, then to Italy. For a brief moment, it looked as if Mossadegh had survived the storm. But Operation Ajax was not over. The second attempt, chaos as a weapon. Kermit Roosevelt and his network regrouped. If a quiet, legal dismissal had failed, they would turn to open chaos. Over the next days, CIA and MI6 backed agents organized violent demonstrations in Tehran, some pretending to be communists, others royalists, to deepen fear and confusion. Attacked symbols of authority, including newspapers and offices, to create the impression that Mossadegh had lost control. Mobilized military units loyal to Zahedi and the Shah. On August 19, 1953, the streets of Tehran exploded. Armed groups, some backed by foreign money, clashed with Mossadegh's supporters. Tanks rolled through the city. The house of Mossadegh was attacked and eventually overrun. By the end of the day, Mossadegh's government had fallen. General Fazlollah Zahedi emerged as the new prime minister. The Shah's power was restored and significantly strengthened. Around 200 to 300 people were killed in the fighting. Mossadegh's fate, from prime minister to prisoner. Mossadegh was arrested and put on trial for treason. The man who had stood for constitutionalism and national sovereignty was now judged by a system reshaped by his enemies. He was sentenced not to death, but to 3 years in prison, followed by house arrest for the rest of his life. He spent his final years confined to his family estate in Ahmedabad, cut off from political life, yet still a symbol in the hearts of many Iranians. He died in 1967, reportedly of cancer, not killed in the coup, but but slowly erased from power and public space. Even in death, the state denied him a public funeral in Tehran. His body remained in Ahmedabad, buried quietly, while the official narrative tried to move on. Aftermath: oil, power, and the Shah's new regime. After the coup, the West got what it wanted, at least for a time. The Shah's monarchy became more authoritarian, backed by US and British support. A new oil consortium was formed. British, American, and other Western companies shared access to Iranian oil. Iran received a larger share of profits than before, but control remained heavily influenced by foreign interests. The Shah's secret police, SAVAK, trained with US and Israeli assistance, became notorious for repression. For many Iranians, the message was clear. When they chose a leader who challenged foreign control, that leader was removed in secret, through lies, money, and force. The memory of 1953 became a wound. Declassification and confession: the CIA admits its role. For decades, the US government avoided openly acknowledging its role in the coup. But historians, journalists, and Iranian witnesses kept the story alive. In 2013, on the 60th anniversary of the coup, the CIA released internal documents that explicitly confirmed its role in the overthrow of Mossadegh. One CIA document described the coup as a successful operation to remove a government that had brought economic chaos and threatened Western interests. The language was clinical, but behind it were lies, memories, and a nation's trajectory. Conclusion for Truth Frame. In the end, the story of Mohammad Mossadegh is not just the story of a coup. It is the story of a nation standing at the edge of its own dignity, only to be pushed back by forces far larger than itself. It is the story of a leader who believed that sovereignty was not a slogan but a birthright, and who paid the price for insisting that Iran should control what flowed beneath its own soil. It is also a reminder of how easily narratives can be weaponized. A man who championed constitutionalism and national pride was recast as a threat, a radical, a danger to global order. Labels became tools, fear became strategy, and propaganda became the quiet machinery that prepared the world to accept what would come next. The coup delivered what its architects wanted: short-term stability, restored access to oil, and a compliant government. But the cost was profound. In the shadows of that victory grew decades of distrust, anger, and upheaval, culminating in a revolution that reshaped the Middle East and the world. The seeds planted in 1953 did not disappear, they waited, and they bloomed. And then there is the memory of Mossadegh himself. A man confined to his village, denied a public burial in the capital he once led. A leader erased from monuments but not from hearts. His absence became its own kind of presence, a quiet symbol of what Iran might have been, and of the price a nation pays when its destiny is rewritten by others. For Truth Frame, this story stands as a testament to the fragile line between sovereignty and subjugation, between narrative and manipulation, between the past we inherit and the future we choose to build. It invites viewers not only to remember what happened, but to reflect on how power shapes memory, and how memory shapes nations. Thank you for stepping into this frame of truth. If this story moved you, share it forward and help restore the voices time tried to erase. Until the next episode, stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep the memory alive.